Titanoboa cerrejonensis. Deep in the coal seams of northern Colombia, in a place called Cerrejón, paleontologists uncovered vertebrae so large that at first they assumed they belonged to a crocodile. They were wrong. What emerged from the rock was the largest snake ever confirmed to have existed, a creature that slithered through the world roughly 60 million years ago, only a few million years after the asteroid wiped out the dinosaurs. Titanoboa stretched somewhere between 12 and 13 meters, longer than a city bus, and its body at the thickest point would have been wider than an oil drum. A modern reticulated python, the longest snake alive today, tops out at around 6 to 7 meters, meaning Titanoboa was roughly double the length and many times the mass. It lived in humid tropical swamps that once covered this part of South America, sharing the water with early relatives of crocodiles known as dirosaurids. Titanoboa didn't need venom. Like modern boas and anacondas, it killed by coiling around its prey and squeezing until the animal could no longer draw breath, a method that works just as well on something the size of a small crocodile as it does on a rabbit. Gigantophis garstini. Long before Titanoboa was discovered, this was the giant that scientists believed had once ruled the world of snakes. Its remains were pulled from rock layers in Egypt dating back around 40 million years, placing it in the Eocene, a warm period when Africa looked very different from the desert continent we know now. Gigantophis belonged to a now extinct family called madtsoids, snakes with a body plan slightly more primitive than modern constrictors, but no less effective as predators. Estimates put its length at close to 11 meters, putting it in the same size class as a loaded semi-trailer. Fossil evidence from the same region suggests it shared its habitat with some of the earliest ancestors of elephants, along with a range of primitive mammals, and many researchers suspect these animals were well within its hunting range. For nearly a century, Gigantophis held the title of largest snake in history, until a certain Colombian giant took that crown away. Vasuki indicus. In 2024, a discovery in the Penandro lignite mine of Gujarat, India, rewrote part of the story of giant serpents. Bones initially catalogued decades earlier were re-examined and found to belong to an entirely new species, one that lived around 47 million years ago. Researchers named it after Vasuki, the mythological serpent king said to coil around the neck of the god Shiva, and the name fits. Based on the size of its vertebrae, some of the largest ever recorded for a snake, scientists estimate Vasuki could have reached anywhere from 11 to 15 meters, putting it in direct competition with Titanoboa for the title of longest snake to ever exist. It likely moved slowly, using its sheer mass rather than speed, lying in wait in swampy coastal wetlands before ambushing prey and crushing it in coils thick enough to rival a human torso. PACHYRHACHIS problematicus. Almost every animal on this list gave up something to become a snake, and PACHYRHACHIS shows exactly what that trade looked like halfway through. Discovered in marine limestone near Ain Yabrud in the West Bank, its fossils date back roughly 98 million years, deep in the Cretaceous. Unlike any snake alive today, PACHYRHACHIS kept a fully formed hind leg, complete with a hip, knee, and ankle joint, tucked against a body just over a meter long. The bones of its ribs and spine were unusually dense and heavy, likely acting as ballast to help it sink and swim through the shallow seas it called home, in much the same way scuba divers wear weighted belts to control buoyancy. Because it combines snake and lizard traits so closely, PACHYRHACHIS sits at the center of a long-running debate over where snakes actually came from, whether the first snakes swam in ancient oceans or burrowed through the soil of dry land. Modern boas and pythons still carry tiny internal leg spurs as a leftover of this ancestry, but nothing alive comes close to the fully jointed limb PACHYRHACHIS carried into the water. NAJASH rhyonegrina. Some fossils rewrite the story just by showing up intact, and NAJASH did exactly that. Unearthed in the Candeleros Formation of Rio Negro Province in Patagonia, Argentina, and dated to roughly 95 million years ago, this snake lived entirely on land, far from the coastal waters that shaped PACHYRHACHIS. What sets NAJASH apart is a detail modern snakes lost completely. A full sacrum, the fused set of vertebrae that anchors the pelvis to the spine, still connected to a pair of sturdy hind limbs extending outside the body. It even retained a jugal bone, a small cheekbone that has vanished from every living snake species. For decades, the leading theory held that the first snakes were small, burrowing animals that slowly lost their limbs underground. But newer analysis of NAJASH points somewhere else entirely, suggesting the earliest snakes were larger, wide-mouthed predators built for hunting rather than for hiding in the dirt. YURLUNGGUR campfieldensis. By the time this snake was slithering through the wetlands of northern Australia, the age of true giants like Titanoboa and GIGANTOPHIS had already ended, but YURLUNGGUR still ruled its patch of the world. Fossils recovered from the camfield beds near Bullock Creek in the Northern Territory place it in the Oligocene to Miocene, somewhere between 23 and 11 million years ago. Most estimates put its length between 4.5 and 6 meters, with at least one vertebra suggesting some individuals may have stretched past 7, comparable to a mid-sized delivery truck. What makes YURLUNGGUR remarkable isn't just its size, but the state of its fossil, since researchers recovered one of the most complete skulls ever found for this ancient family of snakes. Those jaws carried teeth built more like a monitor lizard's than a modern constrictor's, hinting at a lifestyle split between water and land, likely lurking in rivers before dragging prey beneath the surface and holding on until the struggle stopped. It's a close relative of Wanambi, and together the two mark the final stretch of a snake lineage that had already ruled the world for tens of millions of years. DINILYSIA patagonica. Some of the most useful fossils in the history of snakes aren't the biggest ones. They're the ones that fill in a gap nobody could explain. DINILYSIA lived in Patagonia, Argentina, during the late Cretaceous, somewhere around 85 to 90 million years ago, and topped out at roughly 2 to 3 meters, no larger than a big python you might see in a reptile park today. What made this snake worth naming after terrible wasn't its size but its skull. When researchers scanned the inner ear using CT imaging, they found something distinctive, a large rounded chamber called the vestibule, a feature otherwise found only in snakes that spend their lives underground. That structure made DINILYSIA extremely sensitive to vibrations traveling through soil, letting it detect the footsteps of prey or predators long before it could see or hear them in the open air. For years, paleontologists assumed snakes lost their limbs by adapting to life in the ocean, but DINILYSIA's ear anatomy pointed the other direction entirely, toward a burrowing ancestor pushing through tunnels rather than swimming through waves.